morning, New Day Fellowship. This morning, we recently celebrated Ash Wednesday. Let's just start with that. And I've never kind of looked into that, and I decided to kind of take a little deeper dive. And then the deeper I dive, the deeper I find there's more deep, but that's okay. But we're going to talk about some of the things that are associated with that and some of the key concepts in that, but also talk about where that we get some of the terminology in there. So who celebrates Ash Wednesday? Roman Catholics, Anglicans, Episcopalians, Lutherans, United Methodists, and Presbyterians. So when did Ash Wednesday first start? Somewhere between the 5th century to the 15th century. And started like in the Middle Ages as a preparation for Lent. And then we're going to have to get into, well, what is Lent? The calendar kind of goes through January. There is, when you start Carnival, and it's a season that goes all the way up till the Tuesday, which is 47 days before Easter. And Ash Wednesday would be 46 days. But what is that? What's important about that Tuesday? It's also known as Shrove Tuesday. The word Mardi Gras in French really means Fat Tuesday. It is called in England or UK, I should say, it's called Pancake Tuesday. So the Tuesday before Ash Wednesday, the Tuesday is a day of celebrating, but it also historically was when you cleaned your house out of the things that you were getting ready for Lent, which might include things like eggs and milk and that sort of stuff. So many of the things that you can make pancakes out of, people were cleaning them out of their cupboards and stuff, getting ready for Lent, but then they found that they could make pancakes. But it's a time of celebration and partying because then Wednesday becomes a somber day. Ash Wednesday means that all of this carnival is over, Mardi Gras is, Fat Tuesday is over, and you get ready for 40 days of fasting, just like Jesus fasted. And so during that 40-day period, and people can practice it in different ways, but they may abstain from the foods that we talked about, the fat-rich foods, but they also may choose to give up things like social media. They may give up alcohol. They may give up anything that kind of tends to control their lives is one way of kind of looking at it sometimes. But they have had to choose what they're going to do and give up for that 40 days to prove that that thing does not have control over their lives. So one of the things that's a visible thing about Ash Wednesday that you can see is obviously the word ashes, but depending on where you are, you will have people that are in that we come in contact with have crosses on their forehead that are made out of ashes. Where do the ashes come from? The ashes are actually, historically, the ashes for Ash Wednesday are obtained by burning the palm branches that were used the previous year for Palm Sunday. And so that's where we get the ashes that they placed on the foreheads. So, what is a focus in many ways of Ash Wednesday? Because I think that Ash Wednesday actually has some very strong meaning that can be applied to us in so many ways. But one of the things that Ash Wednesday kind of talks about, if you really get into it, in the way it kind of is represented, some of the real positives of Ash Wednesday is that it makes us deal with our mortality. We know that death will occur, and many of us have anxiety about dying, and so Ash Wednesday is a way to kind of focus that. And also, they will say when they apply the ashes, they may use two different verses. There's one from Mark. And I'm blanking on it's one something, but I'm blanking on that one. But the second one is that I definitely have. They use Genesis 3:19 And it basically says, "For dust you are, and to dust you will return." But the full verse for Genesis 3:19, "By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and dust you will return." Genesis 3:19, which even within that language, there is a lot of symbolism in Genesis 3:19, because the first man was named Adam, but the name Adam actually means, it comes from the word Adamah, which means from the ground. So Adam is literally the person that is made from the ground. And the kind of whole thing that going into some of this, so you're like, okay, we get the dust, that comes from Genesis. But where do we get the ashes? Where in our Bible do we find that? Because we use ashes to ashes, dust to dust, but you're like, well, there's not a verse that really, if you try to find that verse, you're not going to find that verse. It doesn't exist. But if you look at some conversations that were occurring regarding some of this, you get it from that Sodom and Gomorrah. Then the Lord said, "If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole for their place." And it begins this whole dialogue with Abraham and God. Then Abraham spoke up again. "Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but ashes, what if the number of the righteous people is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5 people? And he says, "If I find 45 there," he said, "I will not destroy it." So you're getting the ashes connotations from the conversation Adam is having with God over Sodom and Gomorrah about trying to save the city. But he basically says, "I am ashes. I am absolutely worthless, but I'm still going to contend with God for these people and try to talk to him about it." You also find in Job, which is interesting to go to Job for ashes, but it's there. And I think some of the thoughts that are in Job are very strong. Obviously, some very good imagery. But in Job 30:17 through 19, Job is talking to God, and he said, "And now my life ebbs away. Days of suffering grip me. Night pierces my bones. My gnawing pains never rest." In other words, it's kind of like, to him, his description is pain is like some animal that's chewing on him and chewing on his bones and grinding away at him. "In his great power, God becomes like clothing to me. He binds me like the neck of my garment." In other words, he wraps himself around me. It said, "He throws me into the mud, and I am reduced to dust and ashes." And so you get how bad Job feels, but then you get how he's saying that God is really there. But then he really says that the power God really has is that he can throw me into the mud, and I'm dust and ashes. So there's where you're getting some of the connotations that ashes to ashes, dust to dust comes from. There's also some very good imagery in Ecclesiastes 3 that goes through what we'd call the seasons passage. The Byrds made a classic song using a lot of this language. I believe it was in the 60s, and so this is a classic song for them that basically was just using a lot of the scripture. Which is interesting, because in the times of the protests that we find in the 60s and everything, that some of these groups were using actual religious things, that strong imagery, and using that in their songs. But it says, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. It says, what do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does this so people will fear him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before. And God will call the past to account. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wickedness. For there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. I also said to myself, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the human spirit rises upward and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them? So this passage, I think, actually, in putting it in, I kind of had this thought today, and putting it in our current context is actually just a tremendous passage. We hear so much about climate change and global warming, and, you can go on and on. But this morning I was struck when I get outside of how different today is compared to yesterday. Because yesterday the sun was shining and it was warm enough that, in the early morning you needed a little bit, maybe a little something, maybe a little more than one layer. But then by afternoon, I was in short sleeves because it was warm, but it wasn't hot. It's not our Texas summer that by noon you're dying. It was good. Just an absolute wonderful day. And for us to really sit around and think that we're going to affect our world, maybe a little bit crazy, I don't know. But I think that this passage is very good in that it also talks to all the turmoil that's going on in our world today in so many ways. There's a new war in Sudan that we've had to pull Americans out because one American has been killed already, and that's happening on the global stage. We have all the conflict with China, and their saber rattling over wanting to take over Taiwan. We have the Ukrainians and the Russians. North Korea is always doing something to try to threaten South Korea. And we're dealing with many things on the global stage, but at the same time with this passage, it basically says there'll be wickedness, there'll be all these things, but there's going to be justice and judgment. There's a time for that, it's coming. But it also talks about just what we really are. I think that certainly if you get around some of our people who think they're all that, maybe that's just the best way to say it, whether they be politicians, whether they be actors, professional football players, it is amazing how fast that they can be reduced to dust. And so, all these major players, and I think it's also just fascinating to me that it's my understanding that one of the biggest goals of the youth in our society is to be like a social influencer, to be in the spotlight, to be on the stage of social media. And I haven't totally followed in this, but I see, you look through some news feeds and you see pictures, and I've read enough of the story to know exactly what's going on. But I mean, there's this one girl in Lubbock that was at the Masters golf tournament, and she's wearing a cap, and she's behind one of the players, and the camera, is showing the player, but they see her and some guy comments on it. And now there's this whole thing about, we find out that she's a Texas Tech cheerleader and they're all going to this. And she has reached fame because she was in the background of a picture. And it's just fascinating how our world looked at that. And people got so focused in on that one thing and have just taken it, and it's incredible. So she now, I guess, is a social influencer. And what I'm saying is there's so many young people who would just nearly, give their arm to do something like that, which they probably shouldn't say that. Somebody might. But you know what I'm saying? That there's some of that. I certainly hope that none of that is driven by some of the violence we see, that people are looking for fame or getting, notoriety, even though it's for negative things, Because I believe that, at least for me, that Bonnie and Clyde, a lot of their stuff was driven by this. They became, from everything I understand, Bonnie and Clyde became like celebrities. They became like rock stars. They said that the police would pull up and crowds would stop the police from catching them. They're like, wait a minute, what did they do? So our world gets funny. So where do we get? We therefore commit this body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life. We've all heard that phrase. It's been used at funerals. We know that phrase. But like I said, it's not a verse in our Bible. It comes from the burial service in the Book of Common Prayer. So it is something that was developed, and it's associated with Christianity, but it's not directly from the book. And in this line of what we've just followed with the passage for a time to plant, a time to uproot, I think that David has a very a realistic understanding of who he is. And back to, who are the movers and shakers? David was the king. But in Psalm 8, for the director of music according to Gittith, a psalm of David. So I think that the Gittith is probably the tune that you're supposed to sing it to. It'd be like saying, okay, on this one we're going to sing it to Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. On this one we're going to sing it to Happy Birthday. On this one we're going to sing it to And so they're getting the music. But anyway, he says, Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Oh, wait a minute. We're already hearing the song. We've got that song modern now. Oh, Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name and all that. Yeah, there we go. You have set your glory in the heavens. Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies, to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, this is David still, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. He's talking kind of himself there too. He's been crowned, but he also is saying that all of us, all human beings, we're made a little lower than the angels. We're made from dust, but yet we have glory and honor. You've made them rulers over the works of your hands. In other words, he's saying that even a farmer is a ruler over his field. He has control over that. Even a fisherman, but in some ways has dominion over the sea. He fishes, and that's one of the other issues that we talk about, just how people are concerned in so many ways. But, the overfishing of certain portions of the ocean by certain countries and doing things that I saw a recent special on taking the shark fins, and they're considered a delicacy, but they basically just want the shark fin. So they'll catch the sharks, cut off the fin, throw it back in the ocean, and you then run the risk of losing your maintenance crew, your cleanup, because the sharks will clean up the dead things in the ocean. You've just basically cut off these fins and thrown a whole bunch of the cleanup crew to be eaten by the cleanup crew. You've put everything under their feet. Allstick is your name in all the earth. So do you see any anxiety from David? We're talking about anxiety in that portion of the world because Christians believed that, you're going to have a resurrected body, and so they would try to save that body, certainly for different reasons like than the Egyptians did. The Egyptians, wrapped bodies and saved them. But the Christians felt that burning a human body was to be condemned, was really bad, because they felt like you took the parts and you just destroyed them. In addition, they would take these bodies and they would place them, because there's the thing that he will come from the east, and so they would bury them so that their head was facing the east, so that when Christ came back, they would rise and be facing that way. So it's even true in many cemeteries that you have the facing of the east. That if you go in cemeteries, they're laid out not north-south, but east-west. That is actually true for other faiths other than Christianity. Oh, sorry. But the Christians, even in a persecuted Rome, were trying to find ways to save these bodies, much these tombs underneath the city. But what was interesting is the limestone from that region, just like the limestone we have, they have actually more caves, probably closer to going down to inner earth caverns, down near Florence, Gerald. They have those kind of areas beneath some of these cities in the ancient world. And they would put bodies underneath there, and you're underground. How do you know which way is east? They did their best to try to figure it out. And they'd put them underground because, the Romans would burn bodies. They had no problems doing it. They had, after some of these battles, they'd make huge piles and just burn them all. So the Christians reacted to that and said, no, we're not doing that. And so they would burying them in these tombs. But the tombs got their names, sarcophagi, directly from the fact that the limestone would basically, it's very alkaline and would interact with the flesh of the people buried, and would literally be eating it away. And so sarcophagi means flesh. You do it with the body, it's still going to decompose. But the difference is Christians had this big thing about, we are not going to burn, because the Romans burn, and okay, there it is. And so, but they also put them underground. Like when I went to the Vatican, I was walking and looking on the floor, and it says, beneath this, and there's an area, a little marker, beneath here, Pope John Paul II is buried. So you walk over here, and so even underneath there, that they're deep. So it's just interesting. So, but the tradition was that you didn't burn the Christians. Christians had a big deal about that. However, we move forward into church history, into the Middle Ages, into the Inquisition. Very pagan for me, because I believe that our Bible teaches that we started with Adamah, created. We move forward in time, we have Jesus Christ. We move forward, we'll have the end days, and then we will have heaven. It's linear. It is not circular. We're not saying that we're going around, coming around. We have seasons in this, yes, but to make it to heaven, so we're going to burn their bodies. So, they burned the Knights Templar, many of them. Who are the Knights Templar? I would have to kind of use a term, and certainly you can get and look up Knights Templar you want. They'd be beset and attacked, couldn't even read. So that, the paper meant nothing for them.